This is Night Trap. It's a cheesy full-motion video game released all the way back in 1992 that stars Dano Plato as an undercover agent trying to take down a family of vampires. Despite the terrible acting and silly production values, this game managed to cause quite a stir with parent groups and eventually led to the ESRB rating system we see today. The reason I bring this up is because a 25th anniversary version has recently been announced for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Oh, really? There's even going to be a limited edition physical version. To help celebrate this upcoming release, I wanted to take a look back at what critics said about not just Night Trap, but every game Digital Pictures released in the 1990s. To do this, I've been pouring through old issues of Electronic Gaming Monthly to come up with a definitive ranking of the best and worst full-motion video games released by Digital Pictures. Join me as we count down EGM's top 10 full-motion video games of the 1990s. When Sega went to sell people on the Sega CD, they used the promise of brand new video game experiences to lure people in. One of those new experiences was the invention of the Make My Video lineup of games, which saw players editing together their own MTV-style music videos with some of the era's biggest names. Unfortunately, Electronic Gaming Monthly didn't review the versions based on INXS, Criss Cross, and Marky Mark, but they did review Power Factory featuring CNC Music Factory, one of the system's earliest full-motion video games and the starting point for our countdown. EGM gave the game a range of scores that went from a terrible 3 out of 10 all the way up to a 6. Nobody really liked the game, though some were more receptive to the experiment than others. I suppose I would recommend this CD if you like CNC Music Factory and don't mind not ever winning a game, explained Sushi X in his tepid endorsement. Steve Harris was less generous, noting that I really despise these so-called games. He explained that you watch a bunch of footage while the song plays, and then you hear the song again and see the video. I mean, he's not wrong. That is pretty much everything you do. The average for Power Factory is a miserable 4.75 out of 10. It's probably worth mentioning that Digital Pictures didn't just make games for the Sega CD, but they also had a string of Sega 32X and even Sega Saturn games that we'll talk about on this list. One of those is a light gun game called Corpse Killer, which had players moving a cursor around the screen and shooting at the full-motion zombies. While this sounds exciting, Electronic Gaming Monthly wasn't convinced. Giving it a 5 out of 10, Al Manuel stated at the top that he can't be too excited about a full-motion video game. He complained the gameplay is sluggish with a control pad, and the use of the Menacer light gun isn't much of an improvement. He would have preferred mouse controls. Id Semrad liked the game a little more, noting that he can tolerate B-movies as a rule of thumb, but there should be more to this game. He gave it a 6, while everybody else went with a 5, averaging out to a 5.25 out of 10. Although they didn't always get it right, I have to admire that Digital Pictures was trying to tackle a wide variety of genres. Supreme Warrior was nothing like the Make My Videos lineups or even Corpse Killer, and instead tried to create a full-motion video fighting game. Sadly, it didn't work out for them. In their 71st issue, Electronic Gaming Monthly gave Supreme Warrior mostly 5s. That said, the editors weren't as negative as the scores suggest. I know I've ragged on full-motion video games before, starts Al Manuel, but for some reason I've developed a liking for this game. He praised the story, though thought the controls were unresponsive. Sushi X agreed, noting that he really likes the look of the game. From the first time I saw it on the 3DO, it reminded me of badly dubbed kung fu movies. He had a bunch of the usual complaints, but concluded that it's not great, but is a novelty fighting game. Well, that it is. Supreme Warrior averages out to a middling 5.36 out of 10. Digital Pictures didn't just try their hand at fighting games, they also had a lineup of sports titles. Slam City with Scottie Pippen is yet another Sega CD game that managed to find its way to the 32X with mixed results. Electronic Gaming Monthly pushed this with their sports section, which meant that it had limited coverage and only 2 critics weighed in. The result was far from a slam dunk. Iceman mentioned that this is an upgrade from the Genesis version, but there are hardly any changes except for the quality of the full motion video. He complained that the game doesn't really change and that you must memorize the video and press the right keys at the right time. Video Cowboy agreed, giving it a 6 out of 10 and concluding that he's going to reject this one at the buzzer. Between the two scores, Slam City picked up a paltry 5.5 out of 10. When Sega released Double Switch in 1994, they hoped to lure people in by directly connecting it to the popularity of Night Trap. It's easy to see why, as this game features yet another washed-up actor, and gameplay that revolves around watching surveillance footage while trapping bad guys. Whether right or wrong, critics were quick to tie Double Switch to Night Trap, and this spiritual successor garnered pretty much the same reviews. More like Night Trap, but only you get to work with Corey Haim. Ugh, yuck, begins Electronic Gaming Monthly. This should tell you pretty much how the rest of this review is gonna go. Check a series of rooms and catch all the bad guys with the main objective being to free Eddie. This game is a little more involving than Night Trap. While it picked up a couple of 7s, it ultimately averaged an above average 6 out of 10. Perhaps the most disappointing thing about EGM's review is that it doesn't once mention Blondie singer Deborah Harry. She's really the main reason to play this game. Now here's a fun fact. Although it came out in 1992, Night Trap was originally filmed over a 3-week period in 1987. It was originally going to be part of the Hasbro Control Vision, a cancelled game system that was set to use VHS tapes instead of CDs. After that system was axed, Digital Pictures decided to bring Night Trap to the Sega CD, making it one of the system's earliest full-motion video games. It may have been revolutionary at the time, but does that mean it was good? The answer depends on who you ask. Like most of the games we've talked about, Night Trap picked up 5s and 6s from EGM. Night Trap is the type of title that makes me ask why several times throughout the game, questions Sushi X. The digitized pictures are decent, but the plot needs some work. Martin Alessi agreed, noting that if there was ever a game targeted at the pre-teen male audience, this is the one. But it was Ed Semrad who was completely won over by Dano Plato's charm, giving Night Trap an impressive 8 out of 10 and calling it a spectacular use of video. Even when the critics weren't blown away by the gameplay, they were all impressed with the technology. Night Trap managed to earn an average of 6 out of 10. Well, it's clear that many of Digital Pictures' games were influenced by movies and television. Few were as blatant as Prizefighter. Between the old-timey acting and black and white footage, this full-motion boxing game often feels like a carbon copy of Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull. And while that could have gone terribly wrong in a number of ways, critics seem to agree that it mostly works for Prizefighter. For a first-person perspective fighting game, Prizefighter fares very well with the black and white footage being incredibly effective, notes Electronic Gaming Monthly. Of course, they couldn't go the entire review without mentioning Raging Bull, but that's to be expected. Perhaps the biggest compliment is the ending, where they concluded that the Sega CD is getting better. I agree that the footage is effective, but this game really does suffer from all the problems associated with full-motion video. That said, the game averages out to a 6.2, making it one of the better reviewed games in the genre. It may be dark, grimy, and a little hard to look at from time to time, but Sewer Shark is the first game on this list that critics genuinely love. Actually, did I say critics? I meant to say critic, singular. When Ed Semrad went to review this full-motion shooter, he ended up giving it a 9 out of 10, making it the single best score of any game we've talked about today. He called it spectacular and complimented that the action literally flies by and really keeps the player on his toes. It's a challenging game that must be seen. Of course, Ed was the only one who was genuinely won over by this game from Sony ImageSoft. At first glance, this disc looks like the coolest thing since Shoes That Pump, begins Martin Alessi. After you get over the cool effects of having a full motion video backdrop of high-speed tunnel racing, the game is rather boring. Sushi X agreed, giving it a 6 out of 10 and saying that this is another full motion video CD with no plot or real gameplay. He complained that guiding a crosshair around the screen is not exciting and suggested that people wait until 1993 to see what the Sega CD could really do. Even with Ed's high score, Sewer Shark was only able to average a 7 out of 10. While all the games we've talked about so far have either been for the Sega CD or 32X, the same cannot be said about Quarterback Attack with Mike Ditka. This full-motion sports game completely skipped the 16-bit era and went straight to the 3DO and Sega Saturn. While this certainly helped the video look nice and crisp, it didn't exactly make the critics fall in love with the football game. Much like Slam City, this is yet another example of a digital pictures game being pushed to the sidelines and covered in the sports section. Video Cowboy called this a unique game that will have you coming back for more, and complimented the solid gameplay and novel approach. Dindo Perez also liked the game, noting that the inside the quarterback helmet cam is a nice touch, as well as other unique perspectives. For once in your life, you can be the quarterback and see how it really works in the big game with a real football environment. With scores ranging from a 7 to a 7.5, the EGM average ended up being a solid 7.25, making it the second best reviewed game on our list. 1994 was a pretty great year for gaming. Between Super Metroid, Final Fantasy VI, Earthworm Jim, and even Earthbound, the industry saw some genuine classics show up on retail shelves. Ground Zero Texas may not have been able to compete with the likes of Samurai Showdown 2 and Donkey Kong Country, but as full-motion video games from Digital Pictures go, it's tops. And the critics at Electronic Gaming Monthly took notice. As Al Manuel succinctly puts it, out of all the Sega CD games with live action, I would have to say that this is the best of them all. The truth is, Ground Zero Texas is different. Sure, it has all the hallmarks that come with the typical Digital Pictures games, including a B-rate story and over-the-top acting. But the reason this works is because it knows exactly what it is, and the talented cast and director manages to make it all work. Let's not forget, this is from the director of Marked for Death, Halloween 4, and Murder at 1600, movies that transcend their schlocky themes. It also stars prolific character actor Steve Easton, Scott Lawrence, and even Robert Zemeckis' wife. This is a team that knows what they're doing, and it shows. Ground Zero Texas is much better laid out in the sense of footage of the game and the action you have to do, explains Sushi X. This has got to be the best Sega CD game I've ever played, gushes Ed. With 7s and 8s, everybody seemed to like this attempt, giving hope that Digital Pictures may have turned a corner. Granted, even the most positive reviews still gripe that the controls are a little stiff and the dialogue is corny at times, but that certainly didn't get in the way of the enjoyment. With an average score of 7.5, this may not be the best game to ever hit the Sega CD, but it's certainly the best full-motion video game the system has to offer. Hey, thanks for watching our countdown of the best and worst full-motion video games. It's worth mentioning that Electronic Gaming Monthly didn't actually get around to reviewing Kids on Sight and 3 of the Make My Video releases, as well as Citizen X and Maximum Surge, which were both cancelled. Thankfully, EGM covered all of the classics, so we get a nice cross-section of games and genres. Do you agree with their ranking? I'm also curious if you're planning on picking up the 25th anniversary version of Night Trap. We have a bunch more full-motion video features to talk about in the lead-up to the release, so I recommend you click the subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.